Hello and welcome to Icons Biography, the channel where legendary lives, unforgettable journeys, and timeless stories come to life. Today, we explore the extraordinary life of a man who transformed silence into a universal language, turned pain into laughter, and gave hope to millions around the world. Born into poverty, shaped by hardship, and driven by unstoppable creativity, he rose to become one of the most influential figures in the history of cinema. This is not just the story of a comedian. This is the story of resilience, courage, and the power of humanity. This is the life of Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin's life is one of the most extraordinary stories ever told, a journey that began in deep poverty and rose to global fame, artistic genius, and timeless influence. His story is not just about cinema, but about survival, resilience, creativity, and the power of laughter in the darkest moments of human life. Charles Spencer Chaplin was born on April 16th, 1889, in London, England, into a world that offered him very little comfort or security. His parents, Hannah Chaplin and Charles Chaplin Sr., were both performers in the music hall industry, a popular form of entertainment in Victorian England. However, despite their connection to the stage, their lives were marked by instability, poverty, and personal struggles. Chaplin's father was an alcoholic whose career declined rapidly. He separated from Hannah when Charlie was very young and eventually died from alcoholism at the age of 37. Chaplin's mother, Hannah, was a talented singer and actress, but her career was cut short due to severe mental health problems. As her illness worsened, she became unable to work, leaving young Charlie and his half-brother Sidney Chaplin to face a harsh and unforgiving reality. Charlie Chaplin's childhood was defined by extreme poverty. There were times when the family had no food, no heating, and no stable home. Because Hannah could not provide for her children, Charlie and Sidney were sent to workhouses, institutions for the poor that were often cruel and dehumanizing. Chaplin later described these experiences as deeply traumatic. The cold dormitories, strict discipline, and emotional neglect left lasting scars. Yet, these early hardships would later become the emotional foundation of his art. The suffering of the poor, the forgotten, and the oppressed would become central themes in his films. Despite the misery, Chaplin showed signs of remarkable creativity even as a child. He observed people carefully, their movements, gestures, and expressions. These observations would later shape his unique style of physical comedy and silent storytelling. Chaplin's first appearance on stage happened almost by accident. When his mother lost her voice during a performance, young Charlie was pushed onto the stage to sing in her place. Although nervous, he charmed the audience with his confidence and natural stage presence. That moment planted the seed for his future career. At the age of 9, Chaplin joined a clog dancing troupe called the 8 Lancashire Lads. Touring with the group allowed him to escape poverty temporarily and gave him professional stage experience. Though the work was demanding, Chaplin learned discipline, timing, and performance, skills that would become essential later. However, when the troupe dissolved, Chaplin returned to poverty. He took on small acting roles, performed in pantomimes, and constantly searched for opportunities. His life remained unstable, but his determination never faded. Chaplin's life changed dramatically when he joined Fred Karno's comedy company. one of the most prestigious theatrical organizations in England. Carno specialized in physical comedy and slapstick, which perfectly suited Chaplin's talents. Through Carno's company, Chaplin toured England, Europe, and eventually the United States. It was during these tours that American film producers first noticed him. His ability to communicate emotion and humor without words made him stand out in a crowded field of performers. Chaplin quickly became one of Carno's most popular performers. His exaggerated expressions, precise movements, and comedic timing captivated audiences. More importantly, he began to understand the power of silent performance, how emotion could be conveyed through movement rather than dialogue. In 1913, Chaplin arrived in America with Fred Carno's troupe. While performing in Los Angeles, he was spotted by Max Sennett, the founder of Keystone Studios, a leading silent film studio at the time. Chaplin signed a contract with Keystone and made his film debut in 1914. His early films were short comedies that relied heavily on slapstick humor. At first, Chaplin struggled to find his on-screen identity, but soon, everything changed with the creation of a character that would become one of the most iconic figures in world history. During a costume selection for a film, Chaplin randomly combined mismatched clothing, baggy pants, a tight jacket, oversized shoes, a small bowler hat, and a tiny toothbrush mustache. This character became the Tramp. The Tramp was poor but dignified, clumsy yet clever, gentle yet rebellious. He represented the struggling common man, a reflection of Chaplin's own childhood. Audiences instantly connected with the character because he embodied hope, humor, and humanity. The Tramp was not just funny, he was emotional. Chaplin blended comedy with sadness, laughter with pain. This unique balance set him apart from every other comedian of the era. Between 1914 and 1917, Chaplin became one of the most famous people on the planet. His films were watched by millions, and his name became synonymous with comedy. He gained creative control over his work, demanded higher salaries, and moved between major studios, each time negotiating better conditions. Chaplin's popularity was unprecedented. People waited in long lines to see his films. Newspapers wrote about him daily. Children copied his walk and appearance. He was no longer just an actor. He was a global phenomenon. Yet, behind the success, Chaplin remained deeply introspective. He was obsessed with perfection, often reshooting scenes dozens of times. His films took longer to make, but the results were unforgettable. By 1919, Chaplin had achieved something almost unheard of for an actor: complete creative independence. Along with fellow film legends Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith, he co-founded United Artists, a film distribution company that allowed artists to control their own work. This marked the end of Chaplin's early struggle and the beginning of his era as a true cinematic artist, not just a comedian, but a filmmaker with a powerful voice. By the early 1920s, Charlie Chaplin was no longer just a popular entertainer. He had become the most recognizable face in the world. His image was known on every continent. Even in places where people could not speak English, they understood Chaplin. His silent performances crossed borders, cultures, and languages, making him a truly universal artist. Yet, behind the laughter and applause lived a deeply sensitive and complex man. Fame brought Chaplin wealth and power, but it also brought loneliness, pressure, and intense public scrutiny. In 1921, Chaplin released The Kid, his first full-length feature film. This film marked a turning point in cinematic history. Never before had a comedy dared to mix humor with deep emotional pain so openly. The Kid told the story of the tramp raising an abandoned child, played by Jackie Coogan. The film was inspired by Chaplin's own childhood experiences, poverty, hunger, and the fear of separation. One of the most heartbreaking scenes, where social workers take the child away, reflected Chaplin's trauma of being taken to workhouses as a boy. Audiences around the world were moved to tears. Critics praised the film as a masterpiece. Chaplin proved that comedy could be profound, emotional, and socially meaningful. Chaplin was famous for his extreme perfectionism. He often repeated scenes dozens, sometimes hundreds of times. While this frustrated actors and crew members, Chaplin believed that true art demanded absolute precision. He wrote, directed, acted, edited, and even composed music for many of his films. This total control made him unique in Hollywood. Chaplin was not just making films, he was crafting visual poetry. However, this obsession also isolated him. He trusted very few people and struggled to form long-lasting personal relationships. Chaplin's romantic relationships became a constant source of public controversy. He was involved with several much younger women, many of whom later accused him of emotional manipulation. His marriages were often short and unhappy. The media portrayed him as immoral, and his personal life began to overshadow his artistic achievements in public discussions. Lawsuits and scandals followed him throughout the 1920s. Despite the criticism, Chaplin remained focused on his work. Art, for him, was both an escape and a form of emotional survival. In 1925, Chaplin released The Gold Rush, one of his most celebrated films. Inspired by real stories of hardship during the Klondike Gold Rush, the film portrayed hunger, isolation, and desperation, but always through the lens of humor. One of the most iconic scenes in cinema history occurs when the tramp cooks and eats his shoe out of starvation. The scene was both hilarious and deeply disturbing, perfectly capturing Chaplin's ability to transform suffering into art. Chaplin later stated that The Gold Rush was the film he wanted to be remembered for. By the late 1920s, the film industry underwent a massive transformation. Sound was introduced to cinema. Many silent film stars saw their careers collapse overnight. Chaplin, however, resisted sound. He believed that silent cinema was a universal language that did not need words. Dialogue, he feared, would limit the emotional reach of film. In 1931, despite the dominance of sound films, Chaplin released City Lights, a silent film with musical accompaniment. It was a bold and risky decision. The film told the story of the tramp falling in love with a blind flower girl. The final scene, where she recognizes him by touch, is widely considered one of the most emotional moments in film history. City Lights was a massive success. Chaplin proved that emotion mattered more than technology. In 1936, Chaplin released Modern Times, his final film featuring the tramp. This movie directly addressed the impact of industrialization, mechanization, and dehumanizing labor. Chaplin portrayed factory workers as trapped inside machines, reduced to cogs in an uncaring system. The film criticized capitalism, mass production, and the loss of individuality. Although it included some sound effects and a brief vocal performance, Modern Times remained largely silent. Chaplin's resistance to full dialogue was symbolic, a farewell to an era. The film resonated deeply during the Great Depression, when millions of people were unemployed and struggling. Once again, Chaplin spoke for the voiceless. During this period, Chaplin became increasingly politically aware. He openly criticized inequality, poverty, and injustice. His sympathy for the working class and the poor made him admired by many, but also suspected by powerful institutions. Governments and conservative groups began to label him as politically dangerous. His views would later have serious consequences for his life in America. Despite growing pressure, Chaplin remained committed to his beliefs. He believed that art should challenge society, not just entertain it. By the late 1930s, Charlie Chaplin stood at a crossroads between art and history. The world was changing rapidly, and the rise of fascism in Europe deeply disturbed him. Adolf Hitler's ascent to power, the spread of Nazism, and the growing threat of global war awakened something fierce inside Chaplin. Though he was known as a comedian, he believed that silence in the face of cruelty was a form of complicity. For the first time in his career, Chaplin decided to directly confront politics through cinema. In 1940, he released The Great Dictator, a bold and dangerous film that openly mocked Adolf Hitler and totalitarian regimes. Chaplin played two roles: the ruthless dictator, Adenoid Hinkle, and a humble Jewish barber. The resemblance between Chaplin and Hitler, particularly the mustache, added powerful visual irony. While the film was comedic on the surface, its message was serious and urgent. It condemned hatred, nationalism, and blind obedience, while calling for humanity, compassion, and freedom. The final speech of The Great Dictator marked a historic moment in cinema. For the first time, Chaplin spoke directly to the audience in his own voice, delivering a passionate plea for peace, democracy, and human dignity. The speech was not humorous. It was emotional, sincere, and fearless. Many consider it one of the most powerful monologues ever recorded in film history. Although the movie was a critical and commercial success, it made Chaplin a political target. Some praised his courage, while others accused him of being unpatriotic or subversive. In the United States, suspicion grew around him, especially during the rise of anti-communist sentiment. Chaplin's political views, combined with his unconventional personal life and refusal to become an American citizen, made him increasingly vulnerable. In the years that followed, Chaplin faced intense scrutiny from the media and the U.S. government. His private relationships were publicly attacked, and his morals were constantly questioned. He was accused of communist sympathies, though no evidence ever proved such claims. The pressure took a heavy emotional toll on him, but he continued to create. In 1947, Chaplin released Monsieur Verdoux, a dark comedy inspired by real-life serial killers and the hypocrisy of modern society. The film criticized capitalism and war, suggesting that society itself was capable of mass murder under the disguise of progress and patriotism. This film shocked audiences and critics alike. Many viewers were unprepared for such a cynical and philosophical tone from a man they associated with gentle comedy. The backlash was severe, and Chaplin's popularity in America declined sharply. By the early 1950s, the political climate in the United States had become hostile. In 1952, while Chaplin was traveling to Europe for the premiere of Limelight, the U.S. government revoked his re-entry permit. Effectively exiled, Chaplin chose not to fight the decision. He never returned to live in America again. Chaplin settled in Switzerland with his wife, Una O'Neill, whom he had married in 1943. Despite their large age difference, their marriage proved to be loving and stable. Together, they raised 8 children. For the first time in his life, Chaplin experienced a sense of family security that had been absent in his childhood. Though living in exile, Chaplin continued to create. Limelight told the story of an aging performer struggling with irrelevance, a deeply personal reflection of Chaplin's own fears and experiences. The film was emotional, introspective, and melancholic. While it was initially ignored in the United States due to political tensions, it was later recognized as one of his most touching works. As he grew older, Chaplin gradually withdrew from filmmaking. His health declined, and the energy that once fueled his perfectionism faded. Yet his influence only grew stronger. New generations of filmmakers studied his work, inspired by his mastery of visual storytelling, emotional depth, and social commentary. In 1972, after 2 decades of exile, Chaplin was invited back to the United States to receive an honorary Academy Award for his immeasurable contribution to cinema. When he walked onto the stage, the audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted over 12 minutes, one of the longest in Oscar history. It was a moment of redemption, recognition, and closure. Charlie Chaplin spent his final years peacefully in Switzerland, surrounded by his family. On December 25, 1977, he passed away in his sleep at the age of 88. The boy who had once slept hungry in London workhouses had become one of the most influential artists the world had ever known. Chaplin's legacy is eternal. He proved that laughter could carry truth, that silence could speak louder than words, and that art could challenge power while comforting the broken. Through The Tramp, he gave dignity to the poor, hope to the forgotten, and humanity to a world often ruled by cruelty. Long after the film stopped rolling, Charlie Chaplin's spirit continues to walk softly across the screen, bowler hat tilted, cane in hand, reminding us that even in the darkest times, laughter remains an act of courage. Charlie Chaplin's story reminds us that greatness is not born from comfort, but from struggle. Through laughter and silence, he spoke to the hearts of generations, proving that compassion is stronger than power, and humanity is stronger than hate. His films continue to inspire, his message remains timeless, and his legacy lives on in every smile he created. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you see the world differently, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Icons Biography for more legendary stories that shaped our world. Thank you for watching. And remember, even in the darkest times, a little laughter can change everything.